And we're live to our listeners and followers. This is States Rights Radio, Federico Lines, and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode is Restoring the Constitution, and we'll be discussing our lawful rights are being suppressed by law enforcement and crippled by a judicial system. And it'll be discussing the 6th, 7th, and 8th Amendments in particular tonight.
Thanks, Seth. Thank everybody for tuning live. Not many people, Seth, here in the United States are really aware of how important the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, and also a little bit prior that we've discussed the 4th is very important. Oh, we discussed the 4th. We didn't discuss the 5th. But the 6th, 7th, and 8th, people are not aware that these are very important rights against law enforcement and our judicial system to maintain those rights. And let's see how we can begin on. How would you like to begin this conversation, Seth?
I'm open, but I'll just say that there's a lot of news stories that have been out recently. There always are a lot of news stories of local what appears to be either police abuse or different things like that get into these amendments.
Yeah, and the thing is that, you get them on both sides, and the problem is that the problem is that, they're just sticking to a political narrative. One on the left says about Black Lives Matter and, defund the blue, and the other side says all lives matter and fund the police or back the blue. And whatever happened to just follow the Constitution, respect the Constitution, and give everybody its due process and fairness in the court system and a fairness penalty or punishment if found guilty? What happened to that?
Yeah, that's, it gets into, one of the things we've discussed almost basically every episode is how we've gone into tribal politics. And, with this issue in particular, it's always these simple-minded, defund the police, defend the police, or Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. And it's kind of like, people are unable to have complex discussions about these issues and really getting down to the fundamentals. And the real problems that I see is that we continue to get more and more top-down approach in law enforcement when the Constitution basically does not give the federal government much law enforcement authority. I mean, you got the U.S. Marshals. That might be the only constitutionally approved law enforcement agency for the federal government, but they're still supposed to be pretty limited in their activity. And we really need to get back to localizing police and allowing local police departments to run their police department the way they see fit and how the local taxpayers see fit for their local law enforcement. The problem is, when we talk about, say, defund the police versus defend the police, there are plenty of police departments that are bloated and do not need more money. But that needs to be decided by the local people who should be funding their local law enforcement agencies. But there are other police departments that I'm sure don't have as many resources, and maybe they should get more money. But that these decisions need to be made by the local people, and the local people need to be paying for their law enforcement agency.
Yeah, no, right there. And also, there's one issue that I have is that the federal courts and the federal government has given too much power to law enforcement, state, local, and federal. And, with the famous case of stop and frisk and Associate Justice Barron White said that there is nothing in the Constitution that forbids a police officer to ask questions. The Fourth Amendment I mean, how can you deny that right where, you can just say, oh, a cop can just stop you in the street and he has the authority. No, he doesn't have the authority. I understand he's a law enforcement individual, and, I respect that. I respect his job. It's a tough job, but it's not that difficult of a job. Your job, they make it so difficult that this is why you create this double parallel of defense and offense, that it's really becoming too extreme, too difficult to manage. So that's one thing that it really disturbs me, is that they've given too much power to law enforcement on the state, local, and federal side. And then, of course, with entering 9/11 and with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, that even made it even a bigger threat to our rights. And people, need to understand, the left and the right, that we have rights. Even the homeless person on the streets has rights, regardless if he's had priors, regardless if he lives on the streets. He has rights just as you and I, because he's a U.S. citizen or he's a legal resident or whatever. He has rights. He has rights to go to court. He has his due process, and let the due process work. So when I see individuals take up, one thing I want to point out, and then we can bring this up, that vigilante justice is not a guaranteed constitutional right. This thing of citizens' arrest and citizen participation in a law enforcement is not a guaranteed right. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that. But as far as due process and individual rights not being inflicted by law enforcement, that is protected. That cannot be denied.
Yeah, and that's, I know that in particular, we got the case in New York, with the subway incident. And a lot of these cases, the thing that really bothers me is I look at a lot of these stories, and I don't really, number one, I think a lot of these stories should not be blown up into these national news stories. They should be handled by local news and, local people knowing what's happening in their community. But what happens is they get blown up into these national stories, and then we got the left and the right, the so-called left, so-called right, that are just pushing their own narrative on it without ever discussing the details of these incidents. And it's impossible to try and figure out who's right, who's wrong in any of these incidents. And that's a big part of that is the media, which is the media plays protection for the government power. Both sides do. And it's hard to make heads or tails of any of these cases. And quite frankly, I don't think I'm in the Chicagoland area. Why am I concerned about an incident that happened in New York? It's not in my backyard. So we've got our own issues to deal with here in Illinois. You've got your own issues where you're at, Federico, and yet we get into these debates about stories that happen hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from us, and we ignore our own problems in our own locality.
No, you're right, and that's one thing that I was having a discussion with a former coworker, and I was telling him about just typical issues that what's happening in Tennessee or whatever, and I go, that's Tennessee, that's their problem. Why are we? It's because this new brand of social media and media. I think. Let me take a step back. I would say it's always been national. I would say in the 90s is where it really started to be really big national. Many people don't even know who Bernard Getz is, even though he was national news. But yet, even back then, I think it was mostly New York and the Northeast area that talked about Bernard Getz. But in the 90s is where it really started to blow up this national frenzy of things. And I mean, it should be handled. You're right, by their local news, by their state news, their state affiliate news and local affiliates, not national affiliates. National affiliates should be just handled, looked on the issue of anything that's happening nationally or internationally. But what really boggles the mind is that Chicago has its own problems, Miami has its own problems. So here we are talking about something happened in New York and New York City and the New York subway. Yeah, I know. I mean, New York has always been a troubled city. There's nothing new about that. It's been trouble since Howard, the mayor of New York City, Howard Koch. So it's nothing new. Miami has its problems. Chicago, the south side of Chicago has its problems. I mean, yeah, we've heard stories of the gun violence there, but I mean, that's the responsibility of the mayor of Chicago. That's the responsibility of the Miami mayor, Dade County mayor. So but when we get to these problems, and we're here, the media wants us to pick a side, and I don't want to pick a side. I want to hear what the facts are. Why was this man disturbing subway people? What is his issue? Why is this former Marine taking charge? I want to know why he put him on a chokehold when he could have put him on something else. They get a sense of vigilantism that they think it's cool. They think it's the right thing to do. And that's where I'm really bothered with it. That law enforcement has a lot to do, and maybe they don't have the time to do it all. So then they take it up to the citizens to take charge, but it's not up to the citizens to take charge. Call 911. I'm sure in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on traffic, they'll be there. They'll pick them up and something. It's not your duty to do that. That's what I want to just go back a little bit with a situation that happened in Florida that became national news with the Trayvon Martin and that debacle, where George Zimmerman was the neighborhood watch person, and he was watching the neighborhood. I would say terrorizing the neighborhood, but we won't get to that. And he approached this young man, and he just started assuming that he is a criminal. Well, I mean, your job is to watch and report. That's what the Neighborhood Watch Association always tells you. Your job is to watch, report it to the authorities, and then the authorities will take care of it. Why are you taking charge? So, this sense of vigilantism, it's too much. It's really too much, and it's really affecting everything.
Yeah, and it goes into again, how we push narratives and stuff, and we don't get to the details. I mean, if it's truly self-defense, okay, that's not vigilantism. That's self-defense. But we never get the facts that we need to know whether or not it was self-defense or vigilantism, and that's a big problem. That when we're in this narrative building society that we're in, where you got to pick your narrative and just go with it, and there's a big problem. But it's just when it comes to police, it kind of going back to what we were talking about just a little bit ago. That you brought up stop and frisk. And I also wanted to note that there's things like qualified immunity, where police, are basically allowed to abuse us and get away with it because they've got qualified immunity. Or civil asset forfeiture, where, the police can... They can basically deny you due process and take away your property because they suspect that your property might have been used in a crime, even though they don't have any evidence of it. But, there's all these protections being given that have eroded the trust between the police and the people. And, what happens is it then creates this natural desire for the people to institute vigilante justice, because they can't trust the police, and so they need to trust themselves. They believe, and we just get this kind of chaos when anything happens where we just feel like we need to do something, and I just feel it's going to get worse and worse if the more we allow the top-down approach from the federal government to dictate how police interact with the public.
Yeah, and before I touch on civil forfeiture and stop and frisk, on the issue of self-defense or vigilantism, I mean, on that note, on what happened in Sanford, Florida, the young man was just walking. I mean, I'm not, but yet again, here's your sense of, vigilantism, that, he wants to prove himself to somebody, and the same thing happened to Georgia with the 3 individuals that murdered the black jogger. Who do you have to prove? I mean, all you have to do is say, hey, there's a suspicious person in my neighborhood. Can you send somebody to investigate? I remember that a couple of years back, I was driving with my sister here in our neighborhood, and we saw a suspicious person. My sister wanted to get out and ask him who was he, and I says, no, are you insane? You don't do that. You don't know who he is. You don't know if he has a gun or what kind of weapon. Why don't you call it in and tell them the exact location, and they will investigate. The authorities will investigate. That's what we're paying taxes for. I mean, we are paying their salary to protect us. And I don't want to put myself in that danger. I don't have the authority. I don't have the training for it. This young man in New York, yeah, he's a former Marine. He has training, but I think he went a little too excessive. But I don't, I don't want to take that responsibility. I'm not, it's not my job. It happened a couple of days ago where I saw a suspicious car close to my home. What did I do? I contacted the authorities. The authorities came by, they talked to the person, they left. Simple as that. I mean, it's a sense of, we've lost a lot of rights. We've lost a lot of leeway with authorities, because now the Supreme Court has done this stop and frisk and a few other ones with warrantless searches, and thanks to Clarence Thomas, which now the Trumper movement are glorifying this man. I don't know why, but they're glorifying Justice Thomas, and I said to myself, why? Justice Thomas has never cared about the Constitution or our lawful rights. Why are you caring for this man? So thanks to him that we have more legislation and affirmance to legislation that suggests warrantless arrest and arrests that don't need a warrant. And that really, that's also why you've come and said that it's up to us citizens. It is up to us citizens to watch out for ourselves, but not to take the role of law enforcement, not to take the role. We can take the role as watching our neighborhood, watching our community, making sure things are clear. If something is amiss, something is strange, you phone it in, you report it. Because they are still law enforcement, even though, law enforcement is kind of tricky, but we still have to respect the law, and law enforcement has to respect us. And I'm not going to back the blue until they back the fourth. But go on, Seth.
And I think another thing is, the media just pushes fear, and we're starting to, everybody's looking at everybody else as suspicious. And, there's obviously incidents where you see somebody who might seem out of place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything wrong. I mean, this is something that because we don't talk with each other anymore in society, we kind of get into our groupthink mode. We get into our bubbles, and we're suspicious of everybody else. And I think that kind of attitude has to be addressed. And I just say, I think about the effectively I lost my train of thought there. But we're just, not everybody's out to get you. Not everybody's out to harm you. I think people should protect themselves the best they can. There's nothing wrong with. In fact, it's a good thing to be prepared if something happens. But you can't be living in fear constantly, and that's both the police are always fearful that the people are against them, and the people are afraid that the police are against them, and then the people are afraid that everybody else is against. It's just we need an attitude change in America. And I also want to touch on what you said about stop and frisk as well. That there's this idea that police have absolute authority over people, and they don't. They have a cop does not have authority over you unless you've been suspected of committing a crime. If you're just walking in public, doing your thing, and you haven't done anything, police don't have a right to talk to you. I mean, and they don't have authority to make you answer any questions. They have authority when you've been suspected of committing a crime, and before that, they have no authority over you.
No, they quite right there, and yeah, you're right. The media and people have installed this fear into the American people and the American public, and they did it with 9/11 on a whole international basis, and they're doing it. The conservative media doing it, or the liberal media is doing it. With New York, or if you're in Texas and you got your rancher with their shotgun, or you got your New Yorker with their muggers. So it's a narrative that it's quite despicable and sickening. And I'm not if I see a young man walk in the street, around 9:00 and he's just walking. Now, if I see him with a bloody knife, that's a different story. Then, of course, I'll call the law enforcement right away and say, hey, there's a man with a bloody knife walking in the middle of the street. Can you please investigate it? I'm not going anywhere near that guy. But they really install that fear. And with stop and frisk and that authority, I want to really touch base on that. And you're right, Seth. Cops don't have that. I mean, even if you are suspected of a crime, they don't have the authority to take you in without first issuing a warrant. And this thing, that what happened in Minnesota with George Floyd, if he is suspected of a crime, then you will, then you will go to the nearest judge, and you will present him with that evidence, and then he will present you with a warrant, and a warrant will be issued for his arrest. But this idea that just because he's suspected of a crime, okay, that's it, you're going to jail. No, that's not how it works. You have to first issue a warrant for his arrest. There is a process. Something that Scalia said, that you can be deprived of liberty, of your property, but not without due process. This is, they cannot take your property away like they did in so many other countries without going to court and proving yourself that you are innocent of those crimes. So that's something that people also don't understand. And the Trumpers nowadays, they don't understand that, just because George Floyd smoked crack or whatever, or he's a counterfeit dealer, okay, show me the evidence, show me the warrant. Don't just tell me that he did this because you don't have the evidence and you don't have the warrant. If you don't have the warrant, he's innocent until proven guilty. Everybody in this country is innocent until proven guilty. And that's the issue that, we have with the O.J. Simpson trial. That was I think that one really blew up. Well, no, it was before that. I think, you know what, come to think of it, let me backtrack again. it's always made national media, and the one that really made a lot of national media that the trial took a long time was the McMartin preschool in LA, California, about a young man who was suspected of being a child abuser to a bunch of little kids in the kindergarten. I mean, the young man, yeah, he's not normal in the sense that he seems a screw loose somewhere. The grandson of the owner of the preschool, but it made such a national media phenomenon that every single preschooler in America started to investigate shutting down or doing this. And in the end, yeah, they filed charges, they filed a warrant, they arrested him, they went to court. But did they prove anything? Did they show anything? No. The man was let go and all that, but this whole media frenzy, and that was back in the 80s, was just a phenomenon that is just despicable. But there's a sense called due process that the American people, mostly from the right, want to disavow, and the left as well to some extent, but mostly from the right. And the right will always attack minorities on that, and that's where I really draw the line there. We're all just one last thought. We're all innocent or proven guilty, and nobody's a criminal, and we're all equal in the law. Whites, blacks, Hispanics, you name it.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, what happens is the left often, I think, blows up the cases, and they pick and choose stories, usually with a racial component, and then the right takes the bait. And, there's a lot of, some of these stories, because there's so many of them. Some of them I see, and I think the police were using proper authority. Sometimes I think the police were wrong. But ultimately, there are a lot of cases that don't get any media attention. And a lot of times it happens to white people who have been abused by the police, and it gets no media attention because the left doesn't have their race baiting narrative to push, and then the right, because they just lick the boots of police. Sometimes it's that they don't want to ever report on any story of police abuse, to kind of get back to the idea of the top-down approach and what's happened, it's turned police departments into basically the police are there to protect the government and protect the corporate masters. And I'll give you kind of a prime example. There was a story from 2020. An elderly woman she had dementia. This was out of Loveland, Colorado. Her name was Karen Garner, 73. She had dementia, and she walked out of a Walmart with a couple of things in her hands that she didn't pay for, but it was because of her dementia. She didn't realize she was taking anything without paying. The items, by the way, amounted to $10. And she wound up being confronted by the Walmart employees. And once she realized her mistake, she offered to pay for it, and the Walmart employees wouldn't let her, and they took the items back. But on her way home, she gets just absolutely brutalized by police officers for $10 worth of items that she was alleged to have stolen. As an average citizen, you call the police and say $10 was stolen from your home, they're not even going to investigate. But for Walmart, they will. And that's what's happened is that the police, when we have this, effectively we have a fascist system in America where the government and corporations are attached at the hip, and that's definition of fascism. And that's what the police then become an arm of the protection arm for the government and the corporations, and not for you. And if we get back to localizing police, then we can have actual public servants again. And I just it's kind of something that I harp on with everything is we need to get back to local everything. And that definitely applies to police.
Well, yeah, I do remember that case of I mean, she was in her 60s. She was suffering from dementia and mental illness. And but that was a local authority that accosted her and handcuffed her. And that's the thing, is that, you have the federal government giving this power into attacking a little old lady, an old lady, an older citizen, without her due process. I mean, and this was a lady that, you're right, she returned the items. She didn't. They forced her to return because they were unpaid. So she was going back on her way home, and the officer had no right. But this is where I'm regardless if you're white, you're black, you're Hispanic, you're an American citizen, you're an American resident, and you have due process. Like the soldier that was accosted by police authorities in Virginia Beach, and he was pepper sprayed because he had a broken taillight. Give me a break. A broken taillight? I mean, this is where you have law enforcement tyranny. And, I don't like to call them either fascist or communist, because I think they're about the same thing. Fascism and communism is National Socialism. Socialism is the same thing. It's a totalitarian country. It's a totalitarian system of central authority, and the federal government breeds on that because we've allowed it to breathe on that. So when these Trumpers defend Clarence Thomas, they might want to think hard before really defending a man that doesn't give a hootenanny about our lawful rights and all that. So that's the beef I had, is that the Supreme Court has granted those rights, and it's despicable that these Trumpers celebrate that, and yet they criticize, because first of all, Trumpers don't have no moral compass, and neither does the left, of course, because that little old lady was never received on the national stage.
Yeah, and that's also into the whole tribalism, is that you'll be offended when it's somebody on your side being abused, but when it's somebody on the other side, you look the other way. And it's kind of like the FBI raid of Donald Trump. I just when that happened, I couldn't listen to conservatives just so upset that the FBI suddenly become politicized. And I'm like, do you know the FBI? Have you ever heard of the FBI before? Because they've been abusing people's rights since the beginning. And as somebody who's not a big fan of Donald Trump, I will say this: I was against the raid of Donald Trump because I don't believe the FBI should exist. But this is what happens is they've been defending the FBI for so long when they shouldn't have, and now they're suddenly offended by the FBI. It creates this insincerity. Do you really care about the FBI abusing people, or is it only because Donald Trump, your savior, was raided?
Yeah, no. I mean, I've never been a Donald Trump fan. I didn't vote for the guy. I was quite happy about the raid, but I get your point. The raid shouldn't have the raid shouldn't have happened. But as long as the raid happened with a warrant, then I'm justified. If the raid happened just like that, okay, no. I mean, you can go back to Ammon Bundy or Ruby Ridge. In Ruby Ridge, they did have a warrant. The thing is that who fired first? Was the federal marshal, or was it his son? We will never know, because his son passed away. His son was killed, and his wife was also was brutally murdered by an ATF agent, an FBI agent. So we will never know. But there's your violence right there. Trumpers defended the FBI and the Department of Justice, but when it comes to their MAGA savior, oh no, they're evil, they're bad, and they go, the FBI was bad, even during J. Edgar Hoover was wearing tutus on a prom night dress. So that's one thing I wanna. That's something that I would like to tell you, the hypocrisy of the politicization of politics, and the left does it as well. But the left they hide their hypocrisy. The right they show it, and they show it, and they're in denial. Is what the right does, while the left they just hide their hypocrisy because the left is just like that. But the right is different. But on that note, the FBI has never been a lawful friend. The FBI should not exist. The DEA should not exist. The ATF should not. The ATF should be a gun store and a liquor store. It should not be a federal agency. So every time I walk by Massachusetts and I see ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, I go, "Oh, is that a store? Can I go get a whiskey and a AK-7 AR-15?" So, but it should not exist. And this politicization of police and all that is just boggles the mind. But and one last thought I want to bring up is the Eighth Amendment. No cruel and unusual punishment should be inflicted based on the crime. And I've noticed these charges and fees. In California, in Illinois, if you don't have a lemonade stand license, you get this fee, you get this fine. Aren't those a violation of the Eighth Amendment just because you don't have a lemonade stand?
Yeah, I mean, you could go into to so many things. I mean, you have municipal codes with your lawn. If your lawn's too high and you haven't mowed your lawn, you can get a fine of $50. Well, who's the victim here? I mean, we can debate whether or not you like longer grass or shorter grass, whatever, but who's the victim here? How are you fining people for these petty offenses? I mean, there's so many fines and rules out there that you can be fined for, and a lot of it's arbitrary and subjective because, of course, you can't go out and ticket everybody. I mean, you don't have enough police, and nor do I want enough police to make sure that everybody's getting ticketed who has broken some little minor infraction. But it's all over the place, all these fines and fees and for victimless offenses where nobody's harmed.
No, nobody's harmed. And, The Simpsons made a parody on that, on a New Year's Eve joke where Homer Simpson's taking out the trash after New Year's Eve, and it's New Year's Day. And here's, what's the officer's name? Chief Wiggum. And he goes, "Oh, Simpson, the first lawbreaker of the day." And then he's saying, "What? Yeah, you're taking out the trash. You're not separating your trash." And then he goes, "What's this? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, rounding up your total. That's another fine." So it's these fines that, it says no unusual and cruel fines or punishments is dictated in the Eighth Amendment. So, these city councils and local councils, nobody reads. Nobody's bothering to read the Constitution, Seth. Nobody is, like I mentioned to you before, when we were discussing the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court in 1917 said that residential segregation was unconstitutional based on the 14th Amendment, and yet they kept on doing it. People are not reading the Constitution. People are forgetting this sacred document that governs our land. People are more worried about singing praises to Donald Trump than singing praises to the Constitution.
Yeah, and also I was just thinking about that with like the elderly woman in Colorado, where what's happening is the police are now being judge, jury, and executioner, and even if this woman were guilty of stealing from Walmart, it is cruel and unusual to tackle somebody and brutalize them over $10 worth of stolen goods. So a lot of those violations are happening right on the spot when police are brutalizing people over minor offenses. Like you said, the guy was pepper sprayed for, what was it, a headlight out or something like that?
Yeah, broken taillight. And he was a staff sergeant. He was a staff sergeant in the U.S. military, and he was pepper sprayed because of a light out tail light.
Yeah, and that's happening before any due process is given. But even if they were found guilty of these crimes, is that a legitimate punishment to be pepper sprayed for having a taillight out? No, of course not.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that humans are not perfect. Humans make mistakes. Humans are careless. But, there is a sense in our brain to dictate common sense and say, hey, listen, young man, your taillight is out. I'm going to just give you a pass. Go get it fixed. Yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to give you a ticket because maybe you didn't know. It's very hard to see a taillight. That's what we're here for. That's what law enforcement is. Or one last story. The young man in, I think he was either Georgia, I'm not sure if it was Georgia or Alabama, where he fell asleep in a Wendy's drive-thru. Do you know that one?
Yeah, that was Atlanta. Yeah.
Atlanta. And he just, he fell asleep in the drive-thru. And this is another thing that, the American public, just because, there's a 911, people assume that it's law enforcement only. No, 911 is for law enforcement, is for medical services or fire emergencies. So that young man that fell asleep probably has a medical condition that required medical attention, not police. But yet again, people assume 911, oh, that's the police. They're going to, it's the only thing that's 911 is police. And, I joke to I know this is politically incorrect, Seth, but forgive me on this. But, the majority of people that probably work at Wendy's, when they saw this young man, they called 911 and, hello, police? I need police. No offense. It's I'm not being offensive here, but it's just the sad truth. But it's quite this young man needed medical attention. I think he was either overdosed or maybe he just has sleep apnea or the other sleep disadvantage. And just because it's not 911 is not just police. And that's another thing, is that people think 911 is just law enforcement and not medical emergencies, not fire emergencies. And that's where we also have a distinct a misunderstanding of what 911 is. And we really need to tell people, and also we need to tell people to read your Constitution, not read MAGA books, not read Karl Marx. Read the Constitution and know your rights, know your lawful rights.
Yeah, and I know we've been focusing on the 6th, 7th, and 8th Amendments, but also remember your 5th Amendment right to remain silent, because that's a very important right. And if I were giving Donald Trump advice for all of his continued legal escapades, whatever you want to call them, just shut up, because you have a 5th Amendment right, Donnie. That would probably be the best legal advice for him. Well, that's good advice for a lot of people in a lot of different incidents.
Yeah, the thing with that is that, and here's the hypocrisy with the Trump move, is that when he was running for president, he was criticizing those people that were pleading the 5th, and now he actually pleads the 5th and wants to keep his mouth shut. After he was criticizing those people. The 5th Amendment, you have a right to remain silent, you have a right not to incriminate yourself, but I think it's a catch-22. You can plead the 5th, you don't have to answer any questions if you don't want to, but yet if you know you're a common criminal, you're also implying, you're saying to yourself, okay, he's not talking, then there's something wrong here, and that's why you take him to your 6th Amendment to due process to find out what's going on. But no, you're right. When you're in your due process, when you have your trial, the defendant can keep his mouth shut. He doesn't have to open anything. It's the prosecution that has to prove your guilt or your innocence, and has to prove your guilt. and the defense can just remain quiet the entire trial. Even the defense attorney can not say anything and can just keep his mouth shut. So with Donnie's just a blabbermouth that he wants to open his mouth when he wants to and close his mouth when he needs to. So, but the Fifth Amendment, remember that when you're in your due process, you don't have to say anything on your defense. Your defense is innocent until proven guilty. So, but that's where law enforcement comes in, and law enforcement wants to take away that right and force you to speak up. Well, like they did with George Floyd, like they did with many others on that. Rodney King is one that, Rodney King, I remember that in 1992, that got a lot of media attention. And of course, the LA riots that came after that got a lot of media attention. And, did the cops really have to beat him because he was speeding on a highway? I mean, speeding on a highway, yes, it's an offense. It's not right. It's wrong because it's a speed limit. But to beat him like that, senselessly, that's really excessive force. And that's something people have to understand, that no matter if you're black, you're white, we all have rights and we all have to respect each other and with due process of the law. And Rodney King did not get it. And yes, his beaters, the law enforcement that beat him, they got their day in court. They were unfortunately found not guilty, and they went home. I mean, again, they were found not guilty in a predominantly conservative county, Ventura County, but they did get their due process. They were found not guilty. O.J. Simpson, he was found not guilty. He got his day in court, and he was found not guilty. Do I believe that he's not guilty or guilty? I mean, the prosecution did not do a very, very well case. The defense I think the defense also did not do a better case, but I think the story presented by the defense did much better. If it don't fit, you must acquit. So, but again, your due process rights is the most important right we have. One of the most important rights we have is due process.
Yeah, and just because you brought up the O.J. Simpson trial, that's something that just kind of reminded me, because I personally think OJ was guilty, but he was found not guilty. So I have to treat him as if he's not guilty, and that's the way it should be. But then, remember years later, and I don't have the details in front of me because it's just coming back to me. But when he went to jail for the, robbery or whatever, I forget exactly what he went to jail for.
Oh, for stealing a memorabilia.
Yeah, and I think the judge treated him as if he was guilty of his murder, and I thought that was wrong. And I think he got a raw deal in that one. And I'm sitting here thinking that, I think he was guilty of the murder, but we have to treat him as if he's not guilty because that's what he was found to be by the jury then. And I think he got a raw deal in his second trial, and he got treated as if he was found guilty the first time when he wasn't.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that, I do remember that. I think he got a little bit, vaguely that was a long time ago, but I do remember that he got an extensive sentence, and I know that the judge probably was one of the people that wanted him to be guilty, and so because of his status and, his not, I also think that, we were found not guilty, you can't be tried for the second charge twice unless new evidence comes forth, which in this case, no evidence came forth on his previous trial. This is a new trial. This is a new charge. This is also one last thought, is this young man in New York City, he had 40 priors. Okay, he had 40 arrests, 40 times he went to court, 40 times he probably served time or not served time. Okay, this will be a new charge, and a new charge will go to court. Just because he's had 40 arrests doesn't mean that all of them are guilty or all of them are not guilty. There is new charges to be brought on, and we'll see where this one lies. And you can't just convict a man just because, George Floyd smoked pot, so he's obviously guilty. Or George Floyd was counterfeiting, so he's guilty. How do we know? How do we know those are his? Maybe those are his friends. You have to know, you have to ask these questions if you want to be a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I have to ask these questions before I sentence the man. I sentence the person. So, that's something that, America likes to judge too quickly. The world likes to judge too quickly, not just America, but the people like to judge too quickly. And we cannot judge quickly because we have a process in America. Better than other countries in the world? Yes, because we have the right to defend ourselves or just stay quiet until we're pronounced guilty.
Yeah.
So, anyway, any last thoughts, Seth, on the 6th, 7th, and 8th Amendments, our lawful rights?
No, I'll just reiterate what you just said is that when these issues come up, when somebody's arrested and they haven't been found guilty yet, they should be treated as innocent, and that's regardless of your political beliefs. I mean, if it's Hillary Clinton who's arrested, the conservatives should treat her as innocent until she's proven guilty. If it's Donald Trump, the left should treat him as innocent until proven guilty. And that should go with every other case out there. Is, you're innocent until proven guilty, and wait until the jury comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if she's guilty. I don't know if she's innocent until she is declared, like OJ. I mean, yeah, do I think he did it? I think he may have been partially involved in the murder of his ex-wife and Ronald Goldman. I think probably AC has something to do with it as well. I think OJ did not participate alone. I think he probably needed a hand. I think probably AC gave him that hand, but they didn't charge AC. They charged OJ. OJ went to trial. He got his trial. He got his due process, and he was found not guilty. End of story. There's certain cases where it goes well, it doesn't go well. I mean, that's what the law says. The law says he was found not guilty. There's nothing we can do. I mean, we'll see how it goes. And the 5 police officers that beat up Rodney King, they got their due process and they were found not guilty. Now, the sad thing is that we can touch base on another program. Do Black Americans get an unfair treatment of the system? I believe yes, because they've always been fairly untreated, badly treated in this country. From their days as forced servitude to segregation, I do believe many Black Americans have been served poorly. Emmett Till, which recently his accuser just passed away, but he just whistled at a young lady. I mean, is that really a crime? Was that really a crime, Mississippi, that you whistle at a white lady and you get beat up? It's stupid. So, but that could be another discussion. But I just know your right, know your lawful rights, know your due process rights, because without them we will be living in tyranny. And don't give in to tyranny. Don't give in to law enforcement just to say back the blue or defend the blue or defund the blue. Just know your lawful rights.
Yeah.
So. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. Seth, it's always a pleasure, and we will tune in next week.
Yep. Good night.
Good night, everybody.